The courthouse felt colder than it should have that morning. Marble columns climbed toward a ceiling washed in pale autumn light. The air carried a faint scent of polished wood and old paper. Reporters filled the benches, their whispers brushing the walls like restless wind. Camera lenses glinted, pens hovered. At the center of it all sat James Miller. His navy suit was cut perfectly. His tie, a deep restrained blue, lay flat against his shirt as if it, too, understood discipline. He rested one hand on the witness stand. The other circled a sweating glass of water. The faint clink of ice against glass was too loud in the silence. Judge Richardson adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Miller, do you swear under oath that you had no knowledge of any diversion of funds from the renewable energy projects under your company's direction?" The room held its breath. James inhaled slowly. He had faced hostile investors, volatile markets, and collapsing competitors. His voice, when it came, was measured. "I do, Your Honor. I had no knowledge of any misappropriation. My commitment has always been to transparency." His lawyer gave the smallest nod. Across the aisle, Elizabeth Miller's fingers tightened around the edge of the bench. Her knuckles blanched white against the dark wood. In the back row, nearly invisible behind a column, two small figures shifted in their seats. Emily and Emma Miller sat side by side in matching sky-blue dresses, braids resting neatly over their shoulders. Between them lay a coloring book and a small box of crayons. Mr. Whiskers, their stuffed gray cat, watched the proceedings with stitched black eyes. Sarah, the nanny, leaned close. "Quiet voices," she whispered. Emily nodded. Emma did not. She was staring at her father. On the stand, James felt a bead of sweat gather at his temple. He ignored it. Judge Richardson flipped a page. "What about the altered reports from the year 2024? The ones redirecting community solar funds?" A murmur rippled through the gallery. The air conditioner hummed overhead. James cleared his throat. "Those reports were prepared by the finance department. I only—" Wood scraped marble. The sharp sound sliced through the room. Two small bodies were now standing on their chairs. "Our dad is lying, Your Honor." The voices were perfectly synchronized. Every sound vanished. A pen slipped from someone's hand and clattered against the floor. A reporter's phone began recording automatically, its red light blinking like a pulse. James's fingers jerked. The glass tipped. Water spilled across the polished surface of the stand and seeped into a stack of documents. He did not notice. He was staring at his daughters. Judge Richardson blinked once, twice. "In my 30 years on the bench," he began slowly, "I have never—" "Daddy said the papers were fake," Emma continued, her voice high but steady. "We heard him," Emily added. The courtroom, frozen seconds before, erupted into layered whispers. Elizabeth's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes never left James. "Sarah," James managed, his voice unrecognizable. "Take them outside." But Emma shook her head. "No." The single word echoed far louder than her small body suggested it should. Judge Richardson leaned forward. "Bring the girls up here." The tap of their shoes against marble sounded impossibly loud as Sarah guided them down the aisle. Each step felt like a countdown. Elizabeth's breath trembled. James watched his daughters approach the bench as if they were strangers. Emma," the judge said gently, softening his tone. "Do you understand where you are?" "We're in the judge's house," Emily replied. "Mommy said everyone has to tell the truth here." A faint ripple moved through the gallery. "And what did you hear?" the prosecutor asked, kneeling so his eyes met theirs. Emma glanced at her sister. A silent exchange passed between them. "It was on Mr. Whiskers's birthday," Emily said. "The stuffed cat," Elizabeth explained softly from her seat. "We ate too much cake," Emma continued, "so we couldn't sleep. Daddy was in his office. He was angry. He said no one would find out," Emily whispered. James's shoulders tightened. "He said the new papers would hide the hidden money," Emma finished. The words settled like ash. James felt the room tilt. His carefully constructed calm fractured at the edges. For the first time that morning, he did not look powerful. He looked afraid. "Your Honor," his lawyer stood abruptly, "these are children. They could be confused." "No, we're not," Emma said, offended. Emily stepped closer to the witness stand. Her small hand reached for her father's sleeve. "Daddy," she said softly, You always tell us strong men admit when they make mistakes. The marble walls seemed to absorb the sentence. James looked down at her hand resting against his expensive suit. The same hand he had once guided across a lemonade stand sign, the same fingers that had wrapped around his when crossing the street. His throat tightened. Across the room, Elizabeth felt something shift. Not in the case. In him. The judge removed his glasses and studied the man before him. "Mr. Miller," he said evenly, "given these circumstances, the court will consider additional testimony." Phones continued recording. Reporters scribbled furiously. But in that moment, the noise blurred. All Elizabeth could see were two small girls standing between marble pillars and billion-dollar accusations, telling the truth with the absolute certainty only children possess. The empire had not cracked under audits or investigations. It had cracked under innocence. Sunlight filtered through stained glass and landed across the floor in fractured colors. James Miller stared at his daughters as if seeing them for the first time. And for the first time that morning, he did not look like a king. He looked like a father who had just been unmasked. The silence did not break all at once. It fractured. A whisper here, a sharp inhale there, the faint vibration of a phone against a wooden bench. Reporters leaned forward as if proximity could sharpen the truth. James remained standing, water dripping slowly from the edge of the witness stand. It gathered at the corner, fell, and struck the marble floor with soft, steady taps. Across the room, Elizabeth felt the temperature shift. Not colder. Exposed. Judge Richardson rested his palms on the bench. "We will proceed carefully," he said. "No one is leaving." The doors at the back clicked shut. Emma and Emily stood side by side before the judge's elevated desk. Their braids were slightly uneven now. Emma's ribbon had come loose. Mr. Whiskers was tucked under Emily's arm, one ear bent. James's lawyer leaned toward him. "This can still be contained," he whispered. James did not respond. Prosecutor Jenkins approached slowly, lowering himself to one knee again. "Emma," he said gently, "when you say your dad said the papers were fake, can you tell us exactly what you heard?" Emma pressed her lips together, thinking. "He said, 'The new papers will fix it.'" "And what was he fixing?" Jenkins asked. "The hidden money," Emily answered this time. "He said no one would find out." The gallery stirred again. The air carried the scent of printer ink and perfume, something sweet and anxious. James swallowed. "Children misunderstand tone," his lawyer interjected smoothly. "Business conversations can sound harsh without being criminal." Emma frowned. "He was crying." That word hung differently. Elizabeth's chest tightened. "Crying?" the judge repeated. "Yes," Emily said softly. "After he yelled. He said he didn't have a choice." James's fingers curled around the edge of the stand. The wood creaked faintly. Jenkins glanced back at the defense table. "Did your father say why he didn't have a choice?" The twins exchanged another silent look. Emma shook her head slightly. "He just kept saying, 'They won't find out. They can't find out.'" The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. James found his voice. "Your Honor, this is speculation built on overheard fragments. They were half asleep." Emily turned toward him. "We weren't half asleep, Daddy." The simple correction landed heavier than accusation. Sarah shifted uncomfortably behind them, hands clasped tight. Judge Richardson studied James for a long moment. "Why were your daughters awake that night?" he asked. James hesitated. "They had a party," he said finally. "They were overstimulated." "Mr. Whiskers' birthday," Emma clarified. A few people in the gallery almost smiled. The tension swallowed it whole. Jenkins stood. "Your Honor, may I ask where this conversation took place?" "In Daddy's office," Emily replied immediately. James's pulse thudded in his ears. "And are you normally allowed in the office?" Both girls shook their heads. "It's the Dragon's Castle," Emma said matter-of-factly. "We're not supposed to go in." The courtroom shifted again. That detail carried weight. Elizabeth's breath slowed. She knew that office. She knew its rules. "Did you go inside that night?" Jenkins asked. Emma hesitated. "No," she said. "We were outside the door." Emily tightened her grip on Mr. Whiskers. "But the door was a little open." James closed his eyes briefly. "And you heard your father say the reports were fake?" "Yes," Emily whispered. "And that no one would find out?" "Yes." James's lawyer rose again. "This is absurd." Children interpret adult language through imagination. Emma crossed her arms. We know what lying sounds like. The room fell quiet again. Elizabeth felt tears gather but forced them back. Not yet. Judge Richardson leaned back slightly. Mr. Miller, he said evenly, why would your daughters believe you were lying? James opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He looked at Elizabeth. She did not look away. I don't know, he said finally. The answer sounded thin. Jenkins stepped back, then forward again, adjusting his tie. Your Honor, permission to inquire about the altered financial reports dated late April of the previous year. Proceed. Jenkins turned back to the twins. Do you remember when this happened? The night you heard your father? Emma nodded. It was 2 weeks ago, after the cake, Emily added, and after Daddy forgot to close the office door. James's jaw tightened. And what was he doing in the office? Jenkins asked. He was on the phone, Emma replied. He said the papers were fake and the money was hidden. And he said no one would find out, Emily repeated. The repetition built pressure. James shifted his weight. The chair behind him scraped slightly against the floor. Did he mention who he was speaking to? Jenkins asked. The twins looked uncertain now. He called them, Emma said. Just them, Emily confirmed. The air felt heavier. Elizabeth studied James's face. She saw something she had not seen in months. Not arrogance, fear. Judge Richardson removed his glasses again and folded them carefully. This court will take a brief recess, he announced. No one is to leave the building. The gavel struck once. Sharp. Final. As murmurs exploded across the benches, James remained frozen. Emily reached up and touched his sleeve again. Daddy, she said quietly, Mommy says when we're scared we tell the truth. Her words did not accuse. They invited. James looked down at her small fingers resting against his suit fabric. The marble columns, the press, the judge, the lawyers, everything blurred around that point of contact. For the first time that morning, the courtroom did not feel like a battleground. It felt like a mirror, and James Miller did not like what he saw reflected in it. When the court reconvened, the air felt denser, as if the walls themselves had absorbed what the twins had said and were still deciding what to do with it. Judge Richardson settled back into his chair. The faint rustle of robes brushed against polished wood. Reporters leaned forward again, the soft clicking of keyboards resuming like distant rain. Emily and Emma remained near the front, smaller now against the vast geometry of marble and oak. Mr. Whiskers dangled from Emily's arm, one stitched paw brushing the edge of the witness stand. Prosecutor Jenkins approached once more, his voice careful. You mentioned this happened on the night of Mr. Whiskers's birthday. A ripple of restrained tension passed through the gallery. Yes, Emily said. We had cake, and we couldn't sleep, Emma added quickly. Too much sugar. A few strained smiles flickered and disappeared. Jenkins nodded. And you heard your father in his office. He was loud, Emma said. Not yelling loud, but angry loud. Emily swallowed. Then he got quiet. Quiet how? The judge asked gently. Like when he closes his eyes and rubs them, Emily answered, mimicking the motion with 2 small fingers. Like he's trying to think his way out of something. James's shoulders stiffened. And after he got quiet? Jenkins prompted. He cried, Emily said. The words settled heavier than before. Elizabeth's breath hitched. She had seen James angry, calculating, determined. She had rarely seen him cry. Emma nodded. He said, I didn't mean for it to go this far. James's lawyer shot to his feet. Objection. We are relying entirely on children's recollections. Overruled, Judge Richardson replied calmly. Continue. Jenkins shifted slightly, lowering his tone. Did either of you see anything in the office that night? The twins hesitated. Emma looked at Emily. Emily looked down at Mr. Whiskers. There's a safe, Emma said suddenly. The room tightened. James's face drained of color so quickly it seemed visible. A safe? Jenkins repeated. Behind Grandma's picture, Emily clarified softly. Elizabeth's heart skipped. The portrait. The antique oil painting James had insisted on hanging above the bookshelf, her mother's favorite frame. We found it when we were playing treasure hunt, Emma continued. You push the frame and it moves. James gripped the edge of the table. Your Honor, his lawyer interjected, This is wildly inappropriate. We are discussing private property based on childish imagination. Judge Richardson did not look away from James. Mr. Miller, he said evenly, is there a safe behind a portrait in your home office? Silence. The hum of the overhead lights seemed louder. James exhaled slowly. Yes. The admission landed with the weight of something irreversible. And what is stored in that safe? Jenkins asked. Personal documents, James replied quickly. Contracts, sensitive materials, nothing unlawful. Emma shook her head. There are folders, she said. Red ones, blue ones, black ones. Rachel Anderson, seated in the second row, straightened instinctively at the word red. And pictures, Emily added. Daddy shaking hands with men in suits. James's lawyer whispered furiously in his ear. Your Honor, we cannot let this devolve into fantasy, he said aloud. These children have clearly been exposed to adult conversations. Emma frowned. We don't know what money laundering is, she said defensively, but we know what hiding looks like. The statement hung in the air. Jenkins stepped closer. Emma, you said there were red folders. Do you remember what was on them? Emma squeezed her sister's hand. Numbers, she said. Big numbers in black, and some in red. Daddy looked at the red ones when he was sad. Rachel Anderson's fingers tightened around her own red folder in the gallery. And the blue folder? Jenkins asked. Emily's voice softened. It has my name on it. The courtroom stilled again. James closed his eyes. It's her medical report, he said quietly. Her cardiology file. A murmur spread through the room like a low wave. Elizabeth felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her feet. And the black folders? Jenkins pressed. Emma looked uncertain now. They have pictures, she said. Men giving Daddy envelopes. James's jaw clenched. Jenkins glanced toward the judge. Your Honor, given this testimony and the previously raised discrepancies in financial reporting, the prosecution requests a warrant to examine the contents of the defendant's home office, specifically the safe described. James's lawyer stood immediately. Absolutely not. This is built on conjecture and the unreliable testimony of minors. Judge Richardson folded his hands. Mr. Miller, he said, voice steady, can you explain why your daughters would independently describe a concealed, safe, color-coded folders and documents consistent with alleged financial alterations? James looked at his daughters. They were not accusing him now. They were watching him, waiting. I can explain, he said hoarsely, but not like this. Emily stepped closer again, her small hand brushing against his sleeve. Daddy, she whispered, loud enough for the microphones to catch. You said strong men fix their mistakes. The words were not sharp. They were gentle. That was worse. Judge Richardson removed his glasses and set them carefully on the bench. The court grants the request for a warrant. The gavel struck once. Reporters surged forward in their seats. Phones lifted higher. James felt something inside him fracture, not violently, but quietly. Across the room, Elizabeth realized this was no longer about overheard words or frightened denials. This was about what lay behind a painting. And what would happen when it was opened? The courtroom did not settle after the warrant was granted. It sharpened. Rachel Anderson rose from the second row when the clerk called her name. Her gray suit was immaculate, but her hands trembled slightly as she took the oath. The faint scratch of fabric against wood seemed louder than it should have been. She faced the judge first, then the prosecutor. I was vice president of finance at Miller Green Energy for 6 years, she began, voice steadying as she spoke, until I was dismissed 8 months ago. Why were you dismissed? Prosecutor Jenkins asked. Officially, corporate restructuring. A thin smile flickered and disappeared. In reality, I began questioning inconsistencies in the company's reporting structure. James did not look at her. Rachel lifted a red folder from the evidence table. The color seemed almost violent against the pale wood. Do you recognize this? Jenkins prompted. Yes, she said. It's a copy of a quarterly allocation summary for community solar initiatives. The declared investment was $50 million. The executed disbursement was closer to 5. A low murmur rolled across the gallery. Elizabeth felt the numbers hit her like cold water. Can you explain the discrepancy? The judge asked. Rachel opened the folder. Paper slid softly against paper. The remaining funds were transferred through layered accounts. Offshore entities, shell corporations. She paused. The patterns repeat across multiple projects. Emma shifted beside Sarah. The red folder, she whispered, not softly enough. Rachel's eyes flickered toward the twins. Yes, she said carefully. The red folders. James's lawyer rose sharply. Your Honor, are we now taking cues from children in the gallery? Judge Richardson did not smile. Proceed, Miss Anderson. Rachel turned another page. Last Thursday, she continued, our stock value dropped after rumors of an internal audit surfaced. That same day, Mr. Miller locked himself in his office for several hours. Emma's head lifted. That was Tea Party Day, she said. A few reporters exchanged glances. Rachel nodded slowly. That aligns with the timeline. James's breathing had grown shallow. Miss Anderson, Jenkins asked, did you ever suspect the existence of a secondary file system? Yes, she replied immediately. I believed Mr. Miller maintained parallel documentation, records not reflected in official reports. And did you ever locate those records? No, she hesitated. But if there is a safe, as described, it would explain a great deal. James's jaw tightened. Speculation, his lawyer said. Correlation, Rachel corrected quietly. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Miller, earlier testimony referenced a blue folder containing your daughter's medical records. James nodded once. Yes. And the red folders described here, would you deny their existence? James's eyes moved slowly across the courtroom, finally landing on his daughter's. They exist, he said. The admission was no longer explosive. It was weary. And the black folders? Jenkins pressed. Emma looked uncertain, but Emily spoke. They have pictures, she said. Daddy shaking hands with men who don't smile. Rachel inhaled sharply. Photographic documentation often accompanies undocumented transactions, she said. Proof of contact. Elizabeth felt something twist in her chest. Miss Anderson, the judge continued, based on your expertise, what scale of misallocation are we discussing? Rachel closed the red folder gently. Hundreds of millions, she answered. Possibly more. The words seemed to drain the air from the room. James shifted in his chair. The scrape of wood against marble was abrupt. There's more, Emma said suddenly. All eyes turned toward her. There's a black folder Daddy looks at when he's sad. James closed his eyes briefly. What's in that folder? Jenkins asked softly. Emily looked at her father before answering. Pictures of Mommy. Elizabeth's breath caught. And numbers, Emma added. Big numbers in red. Rachel's expression changed. Red markings are often used to track urgent transfers, she said. Or overdue obligations. James's composure finally cracked. That's enough, he snapped, rising halfway from his chair. The room froze. Judge Richardson's voice cut through the tension. Sit down, Mr. Miller. James lowered himself slowly. Emma watched him carefully. Daddy cried when he looked at that one, she said. He said he didn't know how to fix it. Silence expanded between the columns. Elizabeth felt the pieces aligning, not cleanly but painfully. Your Honor, Jenkins said, given the financial testimony and corroborating statements, we renew the urgency of executing the warrant. Judge Richardson nodded. It will proceed immediately. James exhaled shakily. The combination is 0419, he said suddenly. The courtroom stirred again. That's their birthday, he added, voice barely above a whisper. Rachel stared at him. You're volunteering the code? Yes. It was not defiance. It was surrender. Emma blinked. Why didn't you tell us that? She asked innocently. James looked at her. I didn't think you'd ever need it. Elizabeth watched him closely. The arrogance that had once filled rooms was gone. In its place was something smaller, something frightened. Miss Anderson, the judge said. If the safe contains what you suspect, what are the implications? Rachel did not hesitate. It would confirm a systemic fraud and possibly expose additional parties. The word additional hovered ominously. Emma tugged at Emily's sleeve. The bad men, she whispered. Elizabeth heard it. So did James. And for the first time, fear moved visibly across his face, not for himself, but for them. The gavel struck once more. Court will recess pending the execution of the warrant, Judge Richardson declared. As officers moved toward the exit, James remained seated, staring at nothing. The red folder lay closed on the table, and somewhere behind a portrait in a quiet office, a safe waited to be opened. The warrant was executed before the afternoon light shifted. By the time court resumed, Special Agent Robert Carter stood at the front of the room, a sealed evidence bag resting on the table beside him. The plastic crinkled faintly as he adjusted it, the sound sharp against the heavy silence. James sat motionless. Elizabeth could see the fatigue carving new lines into his face. Not defiance, not calculation, just something hollow. Agent Carter cleared his throat. At 14:30 hours, he began, voice steady. A federal team entered Mr. Miller's residence pursuant to court-issued warrant. The safe located behind the portrait in the home office was accessed using the combination provided. A few heads turned toward James. He did not look up. Carter continued. Inside, we recovered multiple color-coded folders consistent with testimony provided earlier today. Red, blue, and black. Additionally, we recovered photographic documentation, unsigned agreements, and external storage devices. The faint hum of the projector filled the air as an image appeared on the screen behind him. The safe door stood open. Inside, neatly stacked folders were visible. Emma leaned forward slightly in her seat. "That's it," she whispered. Agent Carter pointed toward the red folders. These contained transaction logs reflecting discrepancies between declared project funding and executed disbursements. Rachel Anderson, seated behind the prosecution table, nodded grimly. "Amounts?" Prosecutor Jenkins asked. "Preliminary assessment indicates hundreds of millions diverted across multiple accounts," Carter replied. "Full audit pending." A second image appeared. The blue folder. James's throat tightened. "Contained medical documentation for Emily Miller," Carter stated evenly. The courtroom shifted. Elizabeth's hands instinctively reached for her daughter's. Emily pressed into her side. "And the black folders?" the judge asked. Carter's jaw set. "Photographs, meetings with unidentified individuals, envelopes exchanged, correspondence lacking official record." The screen flickered again. A blurred image of James shaking hands with a man in a dark suit filled the wall behind him. Emma's small voice carried across the quiet room. He never smiled. James closed his eyes. Carter lowered the remote. "Additionally," he said, "we recovered documents bearing children's drawings on the reverse side." A murmur moved through the gallery. The next image revealed a financial transfer sheet, crayoned suns and stick figures covering the back. Emily's breath caught. "That's ours," she whispered. Carter nodded. "Forensic review confirms the drawings were made prior to the transfers being printed on the reverse. The documents were repurposed." Elizabeth felt the meaning settle slowly. The girls had not just overheard. They had touched the evidence. Judge Richardson folded his hands. "Agent Carter," he said, "does the material suggest independent action or broader coordination?" Carter hesitated. "It suggests the latter." The word hung in the air. James's shoulders sagged. Jenkins stepped forward. "Can you elaborate?" "We identified patterns consistent with structured laundering, layered accounts, offshore routing, coordinated meetings. This exceeds individual misjudgment." Emma shifted uneasily. "The bad men," she said. No one corrected her. Carter glanced at James. "Mr. Miller, do you wish to clarify the identities of the individuals in these photographs?" James remained silent. Elizabeth watched him carefully. She saw the struggle behind his eyes, calculation battling something else. "Daddy," Emily said softly. "It was not accusation. It was fear." James looked at her. "They threatened us," Emily continued, voice small but steady. "They said they would hurt us if you didn't listen." The room stilled. Elizabeth's pulse roared in her ears. Carter's gaze sharpened. "Mr. Miller, were threats made against your family?" James's composure finally collapsed. "Yes," he said. The single word fractured the room more than any accusation. "They knew about Emily's heart," he continued hoarsely. "They knew about her surgery schedule. They sent photos of the girls at school, at ballet, at the park." Elizabeth's breath left her in a trembling rush. "They said accidents happen," James whispered. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. Emma squeezed Emily's hand. "We saw them," she said. "The men in the black cars." They smiled, but not nice smiles. Carter turned toward the judge. Your Honor, based on recovered materials and new testimony, we request immediate protective measures for the Miller family. This appears to be part of an organized criminal network. Judge Richardson nodded slowly. Granted. The gavel struck once. James leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands covering his face. I thought I could manage it, he said into his palms. I thought I could fix it before it reached them. Elizabeth felt anger rise, but it tangled with something else understanding she did not want. You used money meant for children, she said quietly. I meant to put it back, he replied weakly. Once she was safe, Emma looked confused. Safe from what? She asked. James lifted his head. From people who don't care who gets hurt. Silence settled heavily between the columns. Agent Carter gathered the evidence bags carefully. Further analysis is underway, he said. We anticipate additional arrests pending identification. The projector hummed down, leaving the room dimmer. James stared at his daughters. I never wanted you involved, he said. Emily stepped closer. You involved us when you lied, she answered softly. The words were gentle, but they landed like truth. Outside, sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Inside, the empire was no longer collapsing. It had already fallen. And now the question was not whether James Miller had committed fraud. It was how far the shadow behind him reached, and whether his daughters had just exposed something much larger than their father. The courtroom doors swung open with more force than ceremony. Assistant Prosecutor Susan Parker entered carrying a laptop and a stack of freshly printed documents. The sharp tap of her heels against marble cut through the low murmur lingering after Agent Carter's testimony. Your Honor, she said, slightly breathless. We have just received encrypted correspondence tied directly to Mr. Miller. James looked up slowly. Susan connected her laptop to the projector. The screen flickered alive, bathing the room in a pale blue glow. 3 months ago, she began. An email was sent from an address linked to Mr. Miller to a federal anti-corruption task force. On screen appeared a subject line, Evidence of large-scale financial laundering. Elizabeth's breath caught. James's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. The message, Susan continued, included preliminary documentation and a request for urgent contact. It was never processed. A second image replaced the first. A photograph. 2 little girls at a park. Strawberry ice cream smeared across smiling faces, timestamp visible in the corner. Emma gasped softly. That was after ballet, she whispered. Susan zoomed in on the timestamp. Sent 5 minutes after the whistleblower email. The air changed. Elizabeth's arms instinctively circled her daughters. Susan clicked again. Another email draft, unsent. Attached files labeled with internal financial codes. Over the next 8 weeks, she said, there were 3 additional attempts to report irregularities. Each one was followed by a photograph of the twins in various locations. The screen displayed another image. The girls walking toward their school entrance. The angle was wrong, too distant, too deliberate. James's jaw tightened visibly. They told me not to, he said quietly. Judge Richardson leaned forward. Who told you not to, Mr. Miller? James hesitated. They did. The word felt insufficient. Susan shifted to the next slide. The final attempt occurred exactly 1 week ago, she said. This message contained names, amounts, routing accounts, and audio attachments. The text filled the screen in dense paragraphs. This email was intercepted, she continued, deleted within minutes. James shook his head slowly. I never finished sending it. Emily's head snapped up. Yes, you did. The room turned toward her. She looked at Emma, then back at the judge. The unicorn flash drive. The words seemed to echo. Susan paused. What flash drive? She asked carefully. Emma's face went pale, then resolute. The shiny one, with the unicorn on it. James's eyes widened. He knew exactly which one. Where is it? Susan asked. Emma swallowed. We didn't steal it, she said defensively. We just kept it safe. Emily nodded quickly. It was in Daddy's office. He was looking for it. The courtroom leaned forward as one. James's voice dropped to a whisper. I thought they took it. Emma shook her head. No. She looked down at Mr. Whiskers, clutched tightly against her chest. It's in his tummy. A stunned silence followed. Susan blinked. In his tummy? Emily carefully unzipped the seam along the back of the stuffed cat. The soft rasp of fabric sliding against fabric seemed impossibly loud. Her small fingers reached inside. From the plush stuffing, she pulled out a pink plastic flash drive topped with a glittering unicorn. The entire courtroom froze. Susan stepped forward slowly, as if approaching something volatile. "May I?" she asked. Emily nodded. Susan took the flash drive with gloved hands. "For the record," she said, voice steadying. The item was retrieved directly from the possession of Emily Miller in open court. She placed it into a transparent evidence bag. The seal snapped shut with a sharp click. Timestamp was written. Signature added. Chain of custody established. James exhaled shakily. "I copied everything onto that drive," he admitted. "Every transfer, every threat. I didn't trust my office anymore." Susan handed it to Agent Carter, who moved toward a secured terminal at the side of the room. The faint hum of the computer booting filled the silence. Elizabeth could hear her own heartbeat. Files began to populate on the screen. Folders labeled with names, account numbers, dates, audio recordings. Agent Carter clicked one. Static crackled briefly. Then a voice. "Unknown male. Children need their father alive." James closed his eyes. Another voice. "James's own. Please, leave them out of it." Elizabeth's knees weakened. She gripped the bench for balance. Emma looked confused. "Daddy sounded scared," she whispered. Susan turned back toward the judge. "Your Honor, this corroborates coercion and organized criminal intimidation." Judge Richardson's face hardened. "Mr. Miller," he said evenly, "you will provide full identification of the individuals involved." James nodded slowly. "Yes." He looked at his daughters. "I will." The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. Reporters scribbled frantically. The weight in the room shifted from accusation to exposure. Elizabeth realized something profound in that moment. The evidence had not been hidden by investigators. It had been hidden by two children who believed they were playing treasure hunt, and now it was rewriting the entire case. Agent Carter removed the flash drive carefully from the terminal and resealed it. "Initial scan confirms authenticity," he said. "Metadata matches internal server logs." The sound of typing resumed across the gallery like distant rainfall. James looked smaller now, but steadier. He was no longer trying to deny. He was trying to protect. Emma tugged gently at his sleeve. "The bad men can't hurt us anymore if we tell the truth," she said. James swallowed. "No," he replied quietly. "They can't." But as he looked toward the screen filled with names and transactions, he understood something Elizabeth had not yet voiced aloud. This was bigger than diverted funds, bigger than his confession. And somewhere beyond the courthouse walls, the men who had sent those photographs were realizing the evidence they thought erased had just been unzipped from the belly of a stuffed cat. By the time the next witness was called, the courtroom no longer felt like a place of argument. It felt like a reckoning. Mary Peterson from Social Services stepped forward, a thick folder pressed tightly to her chest. Her expression carried the gravity of someone who had walked through consequences, not just numbers. She took the oath, then faced the judge. "Over the past 3 weeks," she began, "I have evaluated the direct impact of diverted renewable funds on community-based projects." The projector flickered on again. An image appeared on the screen. Hope Solar School. But not the glossy rendering from investor brochures. The real building. Peeling paint. 2 decorative solar panels bolted uselessly to the facade. A portable generator sitting in the yard. Elizabeth felt the air leave her lungs. Emma sat up straight. "That's Miss Dorothy's school." Mary nodded gently. "Yes, Emma." She turned back to the judge. "The project allocated $12 million to install a full solar infrastructure. Only $200,000 were actually invested." A murmur rolled through the gallery. "The installed panels," Mary continued, "are non-functional. They were placed for visual documentation." Emma tugged at Elizabeth's sleeve. "Mommy," she whispered, "why does Miss Dorothy still ask for money for fans?" Elizabeth closed her eyes briefly. Mary's voice softened. "Without proper installation, the classrooms overheat. Children with respiratory conditions have struggled." Emma looked confused. "Is that why Tommy coughs all the time?" The silence that followed felt fragile. Mary hesitated before answering. "Yes, Cooling systems tied to the solar grid were never implemented. James's head lowered slowly. On the screen, another image appeared. A ledger entry. Cayman Islands account. Transfer amount, $8 million. Mary turned a page in her folder. Records show a portion of diverted funds was used to cover private medical procedures. The words landed carefully, not accusatory, factual. Elizabeth's gaze moved to James. He did not deny it. It was for her surgery, he said quietly. Emily blinked. For my heart? James nodded. The insurance refused to approve it in time. Mary held the next document up for the court to see. The timeline aligns with Emily's scheduled procedure. Elizabeth's stomach tightened. You stole from children to save ours, she said, voice barely controlled. James looked up at her. I was going to put it back. Emma's voice cut through the air. But you told us we have to help Miss Dorothy. Her small face was twisted in confusion, not anger. We even made signs. Elizabeth remembered the lemonade stand. Cardboard signs with crooked letters. Bring the son to school. Mary flipped another page. Charity events involving the twins were documented and used in investor materials to legitimize reported expenditures. A slide appeared. Photographs of Emma and Emily smiling beside children from Hope School. Elizabeth felt something inside her fracture. They were props, she whispered. James shook his head immediately. No, I never meant, but you let it happen, Elizabeth said sharply. The judge's gavel tapped once. Mary continued. 17 similar projects show the same pattern. Public announcements, community engagement, minimal or no follow-through. On screen, more schools, more decorative panels, more empty rooftops. Emma's voice was softer now. Is that why the school looks sad in the pictures? Elizabeth could not answer. Mary closed her folder slowly. The financial harm is measurable. The psychological harm is not. James leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I thought I could fix it before anyone knew, he said. But we knew, Emily replied gently. He looked at her. She wasn't accusing. She was stating fact. Mary stepped back from the stand. My professional recommendation, she said, is immediate restitution to all affected communities, without delay. Judge Richardson nodded solemnly. That will be considered. James rose slowly. Your Honor, he said, voice rough, I will sign a full confession. Every transfer, every account. I will liquidate everything necessary. Emma sniffed quietly. Can we give Miss Dorothy our piggy bank? She asked. It has almost $100. A few people in the gallery lowered their heads. James covered his face with his hands. That won't be necessary, the judge said gently. Your father will ensure the funds are returned. James looked up. I will. Elizabeth studied him carefully. Not the CEO. Not the strategist, just a man who had tried to choose one child over many, and failed them all. Emily stepped closer. Daddy, she asked softly, were you scared? The question was simple. The answer was not. Yes, James whispered. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly above. Elizabeth realized something then. This was no longer about whether he had committed crimes. That was certain. It was about whether the truth he was finally offering would be enough to undo what had been taken. On the screen behind them, the image of Hope School lingered. Sunlight hit the useless panels and reflected weakly. Emma looked up at the projection. We can build a real one, she said quietly. Elizabeth tightened her arms around her daughters. The reckoning had moved beyond hidden safes and encrypted files. Now it had faces, classrooms, children. And the cost of one father's fear had been measured in stolen sunlight. The only question left was whether confession could begin to restore it. The following morning, the courtroom lights felt harsher, not dramatic clinical. On the prosecution table sat 3 sealed evidence bags. Each bore a handwritten timestamp and signature. The plastic reflected the overhead fluorescence in cold white streaks. Agent Carter stood beside them. For the record, he said, the external storage device previously submitted has been analyzed in full. Chain of custody remained uninterrupted from retrieval to forensic extraction. The clerk read the timestamps aloud, each minute accounted for, each transfer documented. James listened without blinking. On the projection screen behind Carter, folders opened one by one. Spreadsheets filled with routing codes, Offshore accounts tied to shell corporations. Internal memos marked urgent. Carter clicked again. An audio file. Static, then a voice. Unknown male. You don't report anything, you cooperate. Another voice. James's. I need more time. You already used your time. The audio ended. No one in the courtroom moved. Carter switched slides. A high-resolution image of a man in a dark overcoat appeared on the screen. His expression was sharp, controlled. One side of his mouth tilted upward in what might have been a smile. Emma inhaled sharply. That's him. The courtroom turned toward her. The wolf smile, man? She whispered. Carter nodded once. Identified as Victor Blackwood. Another image appeared. A taller man, thin, silver watch visible beneath his cuff. Richard Sterling, Carter said. A third. A stockier figure. Slight limp, visible in the frame. Emma's voice trembled. He walks funny. Marcus Bishop, Carter confirmed. James's jaw tightened at the sound of the names spoken aloud. They're part of a coordinated laundering network, Carter continued. Operating across 3 continents. Clean energy companies used as fronts. The screen shifted to a diagram. Lines connecting entities, arrows tracing money flow. It resembled tangled string. Emma leaned toward Emily. It looks like our web. Elizabeth felt the echo of that comparison settle deeply. Carter gestured to the diagram. Each colored line represents a category. Red, direct diversion. Blue, international layering. Green, bribery allocation. James lowered his head. The evidence did not accuse him anymore. It dwarfed him. Prosecutor Jenkins stepped forward. Mr. Miller has agreed to identify all points of contact and financial pathways. James stood slowly. I will. His voice did not carry the tone of negotiation. It carried inevitability. Carter handed him a folder. James flipped through photographs projected above him, meetings in dim conference rooms, restaurant back tables, airport lounges. He pointed. That's Blackwood. Another. Sterling handled overseas routing. Another. Bishop delivered the threats. The word threats tightened the air again. Carter nodded to an officer at the side of the room. The officer stepped out quietly. On screen, another audio file played. Unknown voice. Children need their father alive. A pause. And fathers need both hands to hug them. Elizabeth felt her knees weaken. She gripped the bench behind her for balance. James did not look at her. He looked at his daughters. I should have reported it sooner, he said. Emma shook her head slightly. You tried. The simplicity of it pierced the room. Carter cleared his throat. Federal teams have executed coordinated arrests this morning. A slide appeared. Photographs of Blackwood and Sterling being escorted from separate buildings. Handcuffs visible, flashing lights in the background. A murmur moved through the gallery like wind through dry leaves. James exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. It's over, he said quietly. Carter did not confirm that. Further charges are pending, he replied. Additional affiliates are under investigation. Judge Richardson leaned forward. Mr. Miller, your cooperation is noted. It does not erase the crimes committed. James nodded. I understand. Emma's fingers tightened around Mr. Whiskers. Will the bad men go to jail too? She asked. Yes, Carter answered evenly. They will. The projector dimmed slightly as the final image filled the screen. The dollhouse. Specifically, the attic compartment hidden behind a miniature bookshelf. Inside it, sealed envelopes. Hard drives. Copies of internal communications. Carter spoke carefully. The final cache of documents was recovered from the location identified by Mr. Miller. Items were retrieved under supervision, logged, and transported directly to forensic custody. Elizabeth felt a strange mix of disbelief and gratitude. A dollhouse, a child's secret attic, had held the blueprint of a criminal enterprise. James looked at his daughters. I thought no one would ever look there. Emily smiled faintly. We look everywhere. A small sound of restrained laughter escaped someone in the back row before dying quickly. Judge Richardson folded his hands. The court acknowledges the dismantling of a broader network, he said. But the defendant's role remains substantial. James nodded again. He was not resisting anymore. He was absorbing. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Reporters typed rapidly, the rhythm sharp and relentless. Elizabeth realized something as she watched the sealed evidence bags being gathered. The case had shifted from exposure to consequence. The hidden safe had been opened. The flash drive had spoken. The web of names had faces, and the fear that once kept James silent had been replaced by something else. Responsibility. Emma leaned against her mother. "It doesn't look like a game anymore," she whispered. "No," Elizabeth replied softly. On the screen, the last image lingered, handcuffs closing around Blackwood's wrists. The metallic click echoed faintly through the speakers. For the first time since the truth began surfacing, the sound did not feel threatening. It felt final. But Elizabeth knew better. This was not the end. It was the beginning of what accountability actually meant. The sentencing hearing drew a different crowd. Not reporters hungry for scandal, not analysts chasing financial fallout. This time, the front rows were filled with teachers, community organizers, parents holding folders of photographs, and a few elderly residents who had once believed solar panels would change their neighborhoods. The marble floor reflected the morning light in long gold streaks. The courtroom felt quieter, heavier. James entered under guard, no longer in tailored suits but in a simple, pressed uniform. The change in fabric altered him more than chains could have. Elizabeth sat in the first row with Emily and Emma between her and Sarah. The twins wore the same blue dresses, but today they held hands tightly, not fidgeting. Judge Richardson took his seat. "Before sentencing," he said evenly, "the court will hear impact statements." Mrs. Maria was the first to stand. At 68, her hands trembled only slightly as she approached the microphone. "When the solar project was announced," she began, voice thin but steady, "we celebrated. We believed our community center would finally have reliable electricity. Children could study at night. Seniors could keep medicine refrigerated." She paused. "I saved for 15 years to buy computers once power came." The room remained silent. Emma leaned toward Emily. "She makes coconut candies," she whispered. James heard it. "Yes," he said softly. "The twins used to buy them." Mrs. Maria nodded faintly. "They were kind girls." Her gaze shifted to James. "You stood in our center and promised sunlight." She stepped back without anger, just tired dignity. Next came Miss Dorothy from Hope School. She carried a drawing made by her students. She held it up. 32 stick figures beneath a bright yellow sun, solar panels covering the roof. In one corner, small handwriting, "Thank you for bringing the sun." James covered his mouth with his hand. Miss Dorothy did not accuse. "My students still believe the sun will shine," she said. "I hope one day they won't be wrong." She returned to her seat. The air felt thick. Judge Richardson turned to James. "Mr. Miller, you may speak." James stood slowly. His voice did not boom across the room. It barely carried. "I tried to justify it," he said. "I told myself I would replace the funds before anyone noticed, that I could protect my daughter and repair the damage quietly." He looked at Elizabeth. "I failed both." He faced the gallery. "I have provided full cooperation, identified all individuals involved, liquidated personal assets to begin restitution." He inhaled shakily. "But that does not undo what was taken." Emma squeezed Emily's hand harder. James turned toward them. "When you were born," he said quietly, "I promised to protect you. I forgot that protecting you meant protecting others, too." Emily's eyes glistened. Judge Richardson folded his hands. "The scope of financial misconduct was significant," he said. "However, the defendant's cooperation led directly to dismantling an organized network. Assets totaling over $2 billion are being reclaimed." A low murmur moved through the gallery. James did not react. "Taking all factors into account," the judge continued, "this court sentences James Miller to 10 years in federal custody." The gavel struck once. The sound felt inevitable. Elizabeth closed her eyes briefly. "Not in shock. In acceptance," the judge continued. 30% of recovered assets will be immediately directed to affected school infrastructure, beginning with Hope School." Miss Dorothy covered her mouth. Mrs. Maria bowed her head. James nodded slowly. "I will serve the sentence," he said, "and upon release, I request to contribute directly to rebuilding efforts." The judge studied him for a moment. "That request will be noted." Officers stepped forward. Emma suddenly rose from her seat. "Can we hug him?" The courtroom paused. Judge Richardson gave a small nod. James knelt. Emily threw her arms around his neck. Emma pressed her face into his shoulder. Mr. Whiskers was squeezed awkwardly between them. James closed his eyes tightly. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "We know," Emma said. "You have to fix it," Emily added. "I will." Elizabeth approached slowly. She rested a hand on James's shoulder. "They did the bravest thing," she said quietly. "I know," he replied. Officers waited respectfully. James stood. He did not resist when the cuffs were placed on his wrists. As he was led toward the side exit, he did not look at the reporters. He looked at his daughters. They did not cry. They watched. The marble floor echoed under his steps. Outside, sunlight cut across the courthouse steps, bright and almost blinding. Inside, Elizabeth felt something strange. The collapse was complete. The empire was gone. But the fear that once controlled everything had loosened. Emma leaned against her. "Is it over?" she asked. Elizabeth looked toward the stained glass windows. "No," she said softly. "Now we rebuild." Behind them, Mrs. Maria and Miss Dorothy were already speaking with prosecutors about implementation schedules. Not revenge. Restoration. The sound of the courthouse door closing echoed faintly down the hall. James Miller had lost his freedom. But the stolen sunlight was beginning to return, and for the first time since the truth surfaced, the room felt lighter. The courthouse felt different weeks later. Not empty, just quieter. The benches that once held cameras and whispered speculation now carried only a handful of familiar faces. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, spilling soft amber and blue across the marble floor. Emily traced the colors with the toe of her shoe. Emma held Mr. Whiskers upright as if he, too, were attending something important. Elizabeth sat straight-backed, a folder resting on her lap. The title printed across the cover read, "True Light Foundation, Restitution Commission." Judge Richardson entered without the weight of spectacle this time. His robe brushed softly against the wood of the bench as he took his seat. "We are here to finalize custodial arrangements and formalize oversight of the restitution program," he said calmly. Elizabeth felt a slow exhale leave her lungs. Dr. Patricia Warner, the child psychologist, stepped forward. "After extensive evaluation," she said, "the twins display resilience, emotional awareness, and strong attachment to both parents. Despite the circumstances, they demonstrate remarkable clarity about right and wrong." Emma raised her hand slightly. "We talk about it," she offered. The judge smiled faintly. "About what?" "About telling the truth even when it's scary," Emily answered. Dr. Warner nodded. "Their play patterns reflect processing, not trauma," she continued. "They use narrative to understand complex events." Elizabeth squeezed her daughter's hands gently. Judge Richardson reviewed his notes. "Full custody remains with Elizabeth Miller," he said evenly. "Bi-weekly supervised visitation with their father is authorized. Additional accommodations for extended reading and creative time will be permitted." Emma brightened. "Can we bring crayons?" "Yes," the judge replied. "And Mr. Whiskers?" A few quiet smiles surfaced in the room. "He may attend." The gavel tapped lightly, not as a warning but as punctuation. After the hearing, the courthouse emptied without drama. Outside, the sky stretched clear and bright. Weeks later, Elizabeth stood inside a newly renovated classroom at Hope School. Fresh solar panels lined the roof above. The hum of a functioning cooling system filled the space softly. Light flooded through wide windows without the buzz of generators. Miss Dorothy stood near the doorway, watching students unpack brand-new laptops. "They came yesterday," she said quietly. "All 32. Emma ran her hand along a desk. "It's not hot," she observed. "No," Miss Dorothy said. "It isn't." Elizabeth looked up at the ceiling where sunlight reflected faintly off the installed panels. The funding transfer had cleared 2 days earlier. Restitution was no longer theoretical. Mrs. Maria's community center had working refrigeration. The coconut candies were back on the table at church gatherings. Small changes, but real. That evening, Elizabeth sat at her kitchen table with an envelope in her hands. The return address carried a correctional facility stamp. Emily and Emma leaned forward expectantly. Elizabeth opened the letter. Inside were careful drawings, clumsy sketches of a stuffed cat in a superhero cape, and 2 small figures standing beneath a large sun. "Dear Emily and Emma," she read aloud. I joined a literacy program here. I am writing stories about brave detectives and how they saved their town by telling the truth. Emma smiled. Does he sound sad? She asked. Elizabeth paused, then shook her head. He sounds steady. Emily traced the edge of the paper. Is he still scared? Elizabeth considered the question. I don't think so. The phone rang softly from the hallway. It was the scheduled call. James's voice came through, slightly distorted but clear. How was school today? He asked. We saw real solar panels, Emma said immediately. And they work, Emily added proudly. There was a pause on the line. I'm glad, James said quietly. Elizabeth listened to the cadence of his voice. It no longer carried desperation, only accountability. After the call ended, the twins returned to the table with colored pencils. We're drawing the new school, Emma announced. And Daddy reading books, Emily added. Elizabeth watched them sketch carefully. In their drawing, the sun was enormous. Not decorative. Not symbolic. Real. Later that night, after the house fell silent, Elizabeth stepped into her small home office. Blueprints for future installations covered the desk. Grant proposals stacked neatly beside them. Emails from community leaders filled her inbox. On the wall hung a framed picture drawn by the twins. 4 figures. A school with shining panels. A stuffed cat with a bow tie. And a giant sun overhead. Elizabeth turned off the desk lamp and stood by the window. Outside, the neighborhood glowed softly under steady streetlights, powered by a restored grid. It was not perfect. Not healed, but moving. She thought about the first time the truth cracked through marble and silence, about how small voices had shifted something enormous. In their bedroom down the hall, Emma whispered sleepily. Mommy? Elizabeth stepped inside. Yes, my love? We did the right thing, didn't we? Elizabeth sat on the edge of the bed and brushed hair from her daughter's forehead. Yes, she said softly. You did the truest thing. Emily hugged Mr. Whiskers closer. And the sun came back, she murmured. Elizabeth looked at the night sky through the window. A faint glow from distant panels shimmered against the dark. Yes, she replied. The sun came back.